What would you think if I told you that the history of the Atlantic slave trade you were taught in school was just the beginning? The modern world was fashioned by a system of terror, resiliency, and global power that lies underneath the straightforward timetables and classroom facts. You won't view history the same way after hearing the terrifying facts we're delving into today. Number 8. The scale was bigger than you think. The figures are well known to you, but what if I told you they were much larger than you may have imagined? Schools frequently portray slavery as a tragic but constrained phenomenon while discussing it. The operation, which spanned over 400 years and affected almost every continent, was quite enormous. According to historians, more than 12 million Africans were transported across the Atlantic, although that number does not include the millions of people who perished in raids, marches to the coast, or the bloody capture process. Generations were taken, languages and customs were lost, and entire villages were destroyed. The trade involved the reorganization of entire societies for financial gain, not just the buying and selling of human beings. Number 7. The Middle Passage, a floating hell. Don't believe that the ships were simply overcrowded. The actual voyage was a horror. One of the most horrifying experiences imaginable was traveling across the Atlantic during the Middle Passage. Chained together in stuffy holds, enslaved men, women, and children had little room to breathe and were piled like cargo. In the airless, dark chambers, disease spread like wildfire. The floors were covered in human feces, sweat, and vomit, and the stench was intolerable. Those who objected were tossed overboard, beaten, or whipped. Up to 2 million Africans died at sea, according to historians, with their bodies dumped into the ocean, which turned into a watery grave. This was slow torment, not merely transportation. Number 6, not just an American story. Schools hardly ever acknowledge this. The United States wasn't the primary destination. Cotton plantations in the American South typically come to mind when people think about slavery. However, the truth is much more expansive. Only roughly 5% of the 12 million Africans who were enslaved were sent to the U.S. Most were sent to South America and the Caribbean, particularly Brazil, which took in about 40% of all Africans held in slavery. Plantations in these areas produced tobacco, coffee, and sugar in such cruel conditions that slaves frequently perished within a few years of their arrival. Although the United States was a key player, the system was global in scope, driven by global profit and demand. Number 5. Europe's wealth built on slavery. Have you ever pondered how Europe became so wealthy so quickly? Slavery is the solution. European power was fueled by the Atlantic slave trade, which was more than just plantations. Slave labor was the foundation of the riches of countries like Portugal, Spain, France, and Britain. The tobacco smoked in parlors, the cotton used to make textiles, and the sugar used in European tea were all directly derived from the misery of Africans held in slavery. Transporting human cargo made banks and shipping firms wealthy. Slave revenues were used to finance even prestigious universities. The exploitation of millions of slaves was used to finance the Industrial Revolution, which did not happen overnight. Number 4. Resistance was everywhere. But don't assume that slaves were helpless victims. There was opposition everywhere. The most potent aspect of this tale, that slaves continuously rebelled, is frequently omitted from school curricula. Enslaved Africans never silently accepted slavery, whether by little actions like slowing down labor, preserving traditional customs, or covertly teaching others to read, or through massive uprisings. The most well-known instance was the Haitian Revolution, in which slaves revolted against their French owners, routed one of the most formidable armies in history, and founded the first Black Republic. Slaveholding nations were frightened by this triumph, which demonstrated that resistance was a viable strategy for achieving independence. Number 3. The role of African elites. The fact that Africans themselves were involved is something that many people find unsettling. Although the story is frequently presented as Europeans versus Africans, the reality is more nuanced. By kidnapping opponents and selling them to European traders in return for weapons, boosties, and merchandise, some African chiefs and traders took part in the slave trade. This illustrates how slavery tore Africa apart from within, but it does not justify the brutality of Europeans, who created, grew, and benefited from the system. African culture suffered for centuries as a result of the splits brought about by colonial manipulation, greed, and power conflicts. Number 2, abolition didn't end the struggle. Do you believe that slavery was abolished? Rethink your thinking. Abolition is frequently portrayed in textbooks as a happy conclusion, with freedom being granted when the chains were broken. However, the truth was far more brutal. Nothing remained for the freed people. No land, no restitution, and no defense against bigotry. Jim Crow laws, black codes, and sharecropping took the role of slavery in the United States. Colonial powers established new forced labor regimes in the Caribbean. Additionally, a large number of enslaved individuals in South America were left without resources. Racial inequity was shaped for generations by the structures of oppression, even while the laws was altered. Number 1, erase stories of the enslaved. Erasing their stories was the cruelest part of all. The erasure of enslaved people's uniqueness is arguably the most tragic reality. Although they are frequently recalled as statistics, they were more than that. They were farmers, parents, healers, warriors, and kids with names, aspirations, and customs. In order to defend their exploitation, their stories were purposefully kept silent. History took away their humanity by treating them like property. Reclaiming the voices of those who lived and perished within the systems is just as important as studying them if we are to have a thorough understanding of the slave trade. The Atlantic slave trade was the cornerstone of the contemporary world, not merely a period of history. It created economies, established nations, and left behind wounds that are still evident today. Although we may have been taught dates and facts in school, the reality is much more terrible and crucial to keep in mind. If you want more untold history like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because these stories deserve to be remembered, not erased.